Looks like we're live, sir.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like, as I look around, we've got a quorum. Okay, everybody ready to go? I see thumbs up. That's I got Bo, you're right in the middle of my screen with a big thumb up. So there you go. All right, you're ready too. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining in. I would like to call to order the June 10th, 2020 meeting of the City of Charleston Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee, Advisory Committee, and begin as we typically do, although we're distanced, with a moment of silence, please. Thank you. I see some message from David Lewin. All right, so we have a small but full agenda for today. And I, as the chairman, my job is to keep this moving forward. I know that we had a very good discussion at our last meeting and everyone got sent home with homework. So we're going to see how you did. What I propose on our agenda, the first item that we've got on there, and it popped up from our last meeting, is the selection of a vice chairman. I, again, as we did last time, think that we should do that when we can finally meet in person. And I would propose that we, again, defer that on our agenda until we have our first in-person meeting with all the new members of this committee. And I think by acclamation, we'll do that unless there's any objection. And I think next, Keith, is public comment, correct?
Yes, sir. And I'm ready with the submitted ones to give an abbreviation of.
Let me just, for those members of the committee, and particularly those who are new to this committee, we are one of the rare few committees, standing committees, that has public comment, and of that we're all very proud. It's been very difficult over the course of these last 6 or 7 weeks to have public comment that's really meaningful via Zoom. We've put out requests for comment. We've gotten a lot of comments in the last few weeks that Mr. Benjamin has collected. I don't know that tonight we're going to have any public comment live and in person, but Mr. Benjamin has collected a good number of them. And what I've done is asked him to go through and give us a synopsis of each of those comments. Some of them are lengthy. If there's any member of the committee who wants him to expand on any of them, please feel free to chime in. And we'll get through the public comment period and see where we are. My thought is that from there, what we would do is we would give Mr. Benjamin 5 minutes to sort of do a recap of where we are from last time, what our charge has been from the Traffic and Transportation Committee, City Council, and Council Member Brady, who's there. Thank you so much. Give him about 5 minutes to do that, and then go around and give each member of the committee 2 minutes just to sort of summarize their thoughts in response to anything they want to say, what they've thought about over the last 2 weeks. Then we'll refocus back through Keith and get to work and see if there's the work that we can do that will call for a vote or a recommendation. And I'd like to do all that within the course of the next 60 to 75 minutes. So ambitious, but we can do it. Are there any questions from members of the committee, any comments or any objections to the outline that I've set forward going forward for tonight? Okay, silence is assent, as we say in the legal profession. So Mr. Benjamin, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us a summary, a summation of the public comment we've received, and then we will also make these part of our record of the committee.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. A number of comments that we've gotten, as Councilmember said, I will summarize. The first one I have is from Arthur Hoey. He's at 36 Charlotte Street, Charleston. He made mention that he watched the last advisory committee meeting on the 21st of May and had 17 different suggestions, not just regarding the closing and opening of streets, but about bike transportation overall. They included immediate closure and traffic reduction along King Street and also Market Street, expanding the opportunities for restaurants and retailers through existing street parking, providing a north to south two-way dedicated bicycle superhighway at Morrison and Meeting Streets, provide east-west two-way branch feeder bicycle routes, especially along the low line, install counters along primary routes, increase frequency of dash service, and expanding bicycle parking throughout the city. Um, we also had a comment from Casey O'Haron, who lives in right off of Hampton Park at 110th Avenue, specifically saying that there are not enough people using the recreation lane for there to be any issue with social distancing, that there's plenty space around the park for people to social distancing, the majority of which never use it. They have said, quote, give us our street back and stop changing the times it is opened and closed. The park is for everyone to use. Please stop closing Mary Murray Drive. The next one is from Marty Blanchard, who is a resident of the city of Charleston, not a resident of city of Charleston. He's at 5468 Turner Street, North Charleston. Specifically said he's not a resident of Charleston, but he does ride through the city on Meadick Street and Morrison to commute to work in Mount Pleasant. Specifically brought up meeting from the junction of Sproul Ave to Morrison Drive and the neglect of that area, the need for street sweeping and a lot of trash and debris, specifically in the bicycle lane. Also asked for a speed limit change from 45 miles to 35 miles an hour as more businesses open along that stretch. He also made mention of bringing back up the closing of the right lane of the Legree Bridge to motor vehicle traffic as a way, as was done in the study trial, since vehicle volume is light now and they don't need 4 lanes. We also had a comment from a number of businesses along the King Street corridor. I'm going to read out the businesses that were signed onto this letter. Krogan's Jewel Box, Dumas & Sons, Jordan Lash, Hamden Clothing, Grady Irvin, the Charleston Shoe Company, Davenport Obstetricians Shoes on King Street, and then owner of 307 King Street. This was a long letter, but I'm going to summarize the points that were brought up in here. This letter was also sent to the mayor on May 30th, 2020, specifically saying local merchants and property owners listed below are vehemently opposed to partial, permanent, or temporary closure of King Street for a number of reasons. One, that King Street is the spine of our city. Closing the street may look attractive, but Charleston must remain an urban center. It is and not and will never be Disney World. There are some businesses that have stores on King Street because it serves as a billboard for their other particular businesses. They also mentioned their businesses need local traffic, and it's hard enough to attract customers from across the bridges and up 26 and 526. The drive-by pickups have sustained many of the businesses along that corridor during the pandemic. They also iterate other cities like Williamsburg, Virginia, Norfolk, South Beach, Miami, as areas that have closed their streets to vehicular traffic, and says, quote, it is the death of local retail being cut off from traffic. They also mention the unprecedented number of vacancies along King Street. And they also make mention of, I guess there was a request that came in regarding closing Cannon Street from a number of businesses there. And they said, quote, as merchants, we oppose this sort of closure. So again, that is from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 businesses along the King Street corridor. And then finally, Adam Smith from 215 Promenade Vista Street in Charleston, stating that he is supportive of the Opening Streets project in order to help facilitate community connectivity. Closing King Street from Calhoun to Queen would be a great start to implement a pilot program that for the most part exists. Due to, and also mentioned the heavy pedestrian traffic on the narrow King Street sidewalks, and being surprised that this proposal has not come before. Those are all the public comments we received.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Benjamin or me or anybody about the public comment period and the public comments that we have received over the course of the last 2 weeks? All right. Yes, no? Okay. All right. So let's do this. Mr. Benjamin, we're going to give you the floor for 5 minutes to sort of bring us back into our focus. Tell us what our charge is. Tell us where you think we are and where we need to go from here. And then we will turn it over to the committee for their comments, and then we'll go to work.
Yeah, I'm going to try my best not to take even 5 minutes. But one,
I was
just
being generous with you tonight, Henry.
I appreciate that, sir. I really appreciate the due diligence that you all have taken, heard through the grapevines and got phone calls of special meetings and coordinations and conversations that you all have been having, really taking this topic seriously, really digging into this and functioning like an ad hoc committee. I really appreciate that due diligence. With that, just a couple of things I just want to raise. One being our focus, right? There's this opportunity to think about how the public right of way is utilized differently. But at the same time, we have two pandemics going on, right? We have COVID-19 that has significantly affected small businesses, especially food, beverage, and retail, in significant ways. This ability to regain the trust of the general public, that these are places for folk to occupy, and how do we provide that? And then we also have this issue of Black lives. And we saw folk being able to stand up and say that we want to be able to occupy the streets too. And technically, they created their own open streets during those peaceful protest parts, right? And so, how are we taking those things into consideration as we're thinking about what open streets should look like in our city, and how that's expressed both to as a recommendation to the Traffic and Transportation Committee and ultimately to full council, as was requested by Councilmember Brady. Um, just a couple other pieces that have come up for us that I think are important to the conversation. We do have representatives of CPD on the line, but I do want to say that during the amazing cleanup process that occurred along the King Street corridor, uh, as our CPD was doing their due diligence to handle a number of the security and safety issues, a number of the other um, departments were charged with taking up issues and aspects that normally we lean all the way into CPD for, and that included the closing of streets. And so we actually, between my department and also public services, worked out a plan of being prepared to, if was necessary, to close down the King Street, Upper King Street corridor from Spring to Calhoun, both for the sake of safety, but also for cleanup requirements, and otherwise just using our own personnel and additional barricades that we got from District 6 and certain staff from public service that are trained in traffic management. And I think that's an important piece to say in the topic. CPD can speak to this more specifically, but there's a cost to being able to have their services utilized. For example, an off-duty cop is about $30 an hour, right? And you'll need a significant amount of them to be able to handle whatever that particular closure is. And I apologize for focusing on King Street. There's a number of different areas that we could be talking about, but just using that as an example of a way in which other departments can kind of step up to the forefront to fill certain gaps instead of being codependent on public safety to do everything. The other piece is that we were a proposal was put forward to city staff. No decision was made on it, but I do want to make you aware of it regarding the reopening of Market Street. So those vendors there are ready to reopen and get that back going. One of the pieces of their proposal that they have submitted to the city was about the closure of a portion of South Market Street. It's their understanding that with the ability to take advantage of the open air market part, but also be able to expand and ensure social distancing, that they could have upwards of 87 vendors be able to occupy space if that portion was closed off versus, I believe, 57. Don't quote me on that. I'm trying to remember from the document if that wasn't the case. And so I just wanted to bring that to your attention of what we've heard from those merchants and otherwise as to the Market Street corridor area. So my hope is that in you all's deliberation today, that you come to a conclusion about what is the best course of action regarding the question of open streets, and what should be proposed to the Traffic and Transportation Committee, taking into consideration all that we talked about before in terms of the capacity that it requires of the city, but also what reasons would resonate with our council for them to be in support.
Okay, thank you for that summary. I also see Ms. Thompson's on board with us today too. Anything, Meg, to add on before we turn it over to the committee for some comment?
No, sir. I'll just say that the public comment reflects conversations that I've been having in the intervening weeks.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say too. As you can all well imagine, before I turn this over, since the last time we met and today, events, not both just in the city, but in this nation around the world, have changed some views of people. I'm hoping for the better, but it's been an interesting time, and probably locally in terms of the physical effects, no more so than in the King Street corridor and in parts of the peninsula. So that I think has become part of the conversation that we're going to have tonight for sure, which is great, but it will also, I think, have some challenges for us as we go forward and think about all this. So that being said, I have two disadvantages as I'm sitting here. I don't have a list of committee members and I can only see some of you. So I'm going to just start with Mr. Saltzman because he's one I can see. And then please just chime in as we go from there and we'll make sure we capture everybody. 2 minutes or, that's not me, 2 minutes or less, please, for everybody, and then we'll go to work. So Steve, have at it.
I wonder if I should defer, my comments, my time to Najima or to Katie. There were about 5 of us that put together some proposals together. Do either of you want to speak for the group, or do you want me to just riff one of our suggestions?
However you all think it's going to be most beneficial and advantageous to this group. Katie, Najima, do you all want to have at it?
I think we can just jump right in. Who feels like they have the most command of the document, and who worked on that? Katie, we had some collaboration today.
I'm happy to speak to it. Just
all right,
make
Katie,
sure to interrupt.
You've got the floor.
All right. So we've been, I think most of us have been having conversations with business owners, with council members, with the public, to try to get a good, or at least a better sense of who's interested in doing what, who's open to what, especially as things may have changed over the past couple of weeks. And so I will say the public comments that Keith summarized, that matches up pretty evenly with the survey that Charleston Moves had. Those same business owners filled out the survey, and we mapped out their opposition so that we would know where to avoid where businesses aren't interested in this stuff. And the feedback we also got related to King Street is that, Upper King, the retail owners and the restaurant owners are more interested in experimentation than the lower area of King below Calhoun. So one of the pieces of feedback that we got was that most, if not all, of the restaurants above Calhoun are very interested in parklet concepts. And then through discussions, we also wondered if Magnolia Road in West Ashley in Avondale, where you've got a sort of conglomeration of businesses and neighborhoods that can have people who can walk to those businesses, maybe those are a couple of areas, some segment of King Street above Calhoun and perhaps Magnolia Road would be good places to experiment with parklets once city staff has had the opportunity to develop a process and design standards for businesses to apply to do parklets. So that was one item that we did discuss. Some other ideas that have come out of our discussions, and I'm opening up our little brainstorm document to make sure I get it all, was experimenting with perhaps Mount Pleasant Street on the peninsula, to see if we can provide greater and safer access for people who are walking and biking, and also offering social distancing opportunities. Already, Mount Pleasant Street is not accessible for everyone, but there is a large increase in biking and walking along Mount Pleasant Street. Also, the idea of perhaps temporary bike ped improvements in the area of Grove, King, and Francis, where we've got grocery stores, schools, park space, and neighborhoods that and bus stops that folks might need a little bit more access that perhaps we can experiment with, especially in that segment of King where it becomes very wide across the street from the charter school. We also discussed Market Street. So is there an opportunity, which it sounds like there might be, to actually close Market Street to cars between something like 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. So allowing for time for vendors to get set up, and then maybe making that a space for just walking and biking for a chunk of time.
Katie, just let me jump in here real quick. You and I talked about this a little bit today. It's my understanding that that recommendation would be for the south side of Market Street. Is that correct?
We just put Market Street in our little document, but all of this, it was just a few of us brainstorming. So
Okay.
This is definitely open to discussion and
Thank you.
new abilities. And so I think those were sort of the initial ideas we came up with to start. But I also want to emphasize, we did talk about making sure that we have a process, a prioritization process for these ideas and others that come through the city to do these types of pilot projects, and making sure that whatever is proposed meets what we think are high priorities. And so what we had talked about as a little side group was, one, obviously increasing safety, both for vulnerable road users and also for proper social distancing space. And what we know from mapping is that right now in the city of Charleston, there is no sidewalk that is wide enough to accommodate social distancing. The second one was obviously to build equity. So we want to avoid or minimize disparate and negative impact on race, income, age, ability. All of those things are so important that we want to make sure and provide. Also supporting small business access with particular focus on local and Black-owned businesses, ensuring that civic and government meetings and activities are accessible to the public, and then making sure that all of what we are doing aligns with the actions, with the mission, strategy, recommendations, and tactics of the City of Charleston Special Commission on Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation that Council discussed in depth at last night's meeting and is continuing to work on with subcommittees and other things. So anyway, I'll quit babbling and let y'all run with it.
Well, as you all can see on the chat too, Steve posted sort of the test that they've been talking about, sort of to match up with the projects that we might recommend. So I think, and that's a very good place to start, is to have that backdrop that we can go back to and see if anything that's recommended by this committee meets at least those minimum set of requirements. Well, not requirements. How about standards? I think is a better word. I'm not sure I love requirements. Okay, well, thank you for that report. I think all that is super helpful. So I take it that's the GMA Steve Katie report.
Yeah, but Gervais, Mariana, Fatima all have weighed in on this, and I know Carl had some ideas as well. So it's definitely, this is sort of the beginnings of all sorts of brainstorming sessions that were occurring.
And I've asked Councilmember Brady to sort of go last in the comments to sort of wrap everything up. So, all right, who else do I see here? Fatima, are you next?
I did have a chance to look over that document that Katie just discussed, and I feel like it's a great starting point. I do think one of the things I think has to be included in anything we do is, I call it like a feedback loop. We have to have an embedded, I don't know what the word is, embedded feedback loop, some way that the public, store owners, citizens, everyone, all stakeholders can easily submit their feelings, opinions, ideas of what's happening as it's happening. We have to be very nimble, whatever we do. And that requires information. So whatever, and I get a little stuck in the weeds sometimes, but it's really important that there is a feedback loop that allows us to operate with that constant input from the public.
Fatima, is your interest on being nimble, or is it on the data collection?
Both.
Or both.
both, that we get data collection and that we react, you know, relatively quickly. I mean, I don't know how quickly is quick for a council like ours, but
Do
that we don't just sit on information, that it gets processed, that we share it, that we know about it, and that it, you know, that we're generating ideas, and
So-
if we have to, changing if we need to.
Do you do data yourself? Are you a data specialist?
I don't. I wish I was.
Do we have a data specialist in this group?
Well, we can use staff to make sure that data is accepted, reviewed, comes out the right way. We do have the resources internally at the city to do that. I don't think that we're going to ask the committee to do it. We'll have Mr. Benjamin, Meg, and their team as we start collecting data, because there's data and then there's the input. I think two of those things, really, we should have a source through them. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, like
I'll
a
just jump out there.
dedicated phone line, link, website, page on the council, something. That's really what I'm talking about.
You know, let me just jump in right here. Actually, I signed up for text notifications for COVID for New York City. So since March 13th, I've been getting daily updates from New York City about COVID-19, regular updates. This is where you can get food. This is where you can get whatever. This is where you can get such and such. It should not be a problem to set up something for people, business owners, people who are interested, people who want to submit information. Like, this should not be a problem.
Well, like anything,
what we're doing is putting together a process.
it does take some resources, which we're a little thin on right now. And I see Meg smiling up there because I think this would fall on her very broad and capable shoulders. So we'll work through that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right, as I go across, again, I'm sort of a little bit of a disadvantage here. Gervais, I think you're next on my Hollywood Squares here. How are you?
Great, glad to be here. I think it's thrilling that South Market Street could be an answer. So can we move forward with doing that?
I think that's one of the things that once we get past this roundtable will be a point of some serious discussion, I'm hoping. So let's get through comment from everybody and we'll go from there.
That and then getting the parklet process. I think that's a really cool idea. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. A quick comment too, Steve, thank you for being our scribe here. I think what you're adding there is really helpful for us to look at. So you may have just volunteered to be our clerk of the Bike Ped Committee and doing an excellent job of it because we're recording this, so all that's there. David, I think you're next on the hit parade because that's who I see next. I see you twice, by the way.
I know. One so I can see things and one so you can see me.
All right, excellent.
The other thing I want to make sure that we don't miss is what Mr. Benjamin sent us in terms of the grant potential application, and that we should, I mean, that seems like low-hanging fruit, and we certainly should be going with that. I think the one issue in terms of that grant is that the project, whatever it is, needs to be strategically geared towards disrupting historic inequities. And I'm not sure that most of the King Street and Market Street stuff meet that. And so we want to make sure we have something that could actually meet and be used for this grant award and be successful. And that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Who am I missing here? I know I'm missing somebody. Who am I missing? Someone jump in. I know Councilman Brady. Wait, I just saw, oh, wait a minute.
Co-chair Matt is Moldenhauer. He's on. He's not, doesn't have video. And I see Mariana is here as well.
All right, let's start with Mariana
well.
and then we'll go to Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I realized that without video, I may be just a little black dot.
It's really weird looking at all this stuff.
Hey, well, I was really excited to participate in the conversation around this document that Katie reviewed. So. But I would just, provide just additional support for everything that she's noted. And then also, remind that I think my biggest priority today is that we come out of this with a recommendation. And like Fatima said, that we move forward with something and that we continue to use that set of criteria or some version of that to say that we will continue to work on and evaluate opportunities along the lines of those criteria, and be nimble about them, right? And so these are just, these are pilot projects. We don't want everybody to, freak out over them. We want to be able to, test and find ways to provide additional opportunities for businesses, for citizens, for everyone to participate safely in the life of our great city. So, but just if we can just, focus on wrapping up today's meeting with an action item and a recommendation for moving forward.
I think those are excellent points, and thank you for that. I agree. Bo, you're right in the middle. I went right over the top of you. So we'll go Bo, then we'll get to you, Matt.
Cool. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. I'm actually on South Market right now. You can see my store heading right there. So count another store as in. I think that sounds like a really cool idea. And yeah, throw it on the data. But this is only my second meeting. I'm still pretty new. I think 2020 might have been one of the worst possible years to debut in working in public. So chalk that up as a win for me. So I'm mostly trying to sit back, take notes, learn as much as I can. So right now, that's really my only input.
Great. Thank you. Matt, I can't see you, but I know you're there. Matt Moldenauer, are you out there? Huh.
He's unmuted.
See him a couple different ways. All right. Councilmember Brady, let's go to you. And if Matt chimes back in, we'll get him.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, so I had a conversation with several other people on the commission. So what Steve's presented and the brainstorming group, I'm very much in favor of. I would caveat on the parklets, and Alan, I love you guys in the planning department, but let's not have it be like a 4-page documentation process. I think we want to make something that's appealing to the business owners, and that'll get their buy-in, because ultimately at the end of the day, we need their support on this, because it's for them, but it's also for equity and access for the general public, both on bicycles and moving about by foot. So, we want to make sure that they're realistic, actionable, and also feasible for the city to do, which I think most of, if not all of the proposals are. Mr. Chairman, I was very glad to hear about the South Market idea as well, that's coming from the vendors. It's not just us kind of dictating it, so to speak. So, that's a huge win in and of itself. So, always open to new ideas if anybody else has some that we didn't think about, because it's not completely exhaustive. But one of the things when we were brainstorming was focusing on kind of the quick wins that we could get that will have a measurable impact.
Right. Excellent. Matt, have we gotten you back yet?
I'm here.
Oh, all right. Excellent.
Okay.
We can see you. We can hear you.
Okay, good. So I'm really encouraged by everything everybody said today. I think it's awesome that y'all have met and have a document to share. I have a couple thoughts, and then I want to share something that I made. But being the Bike Ped Committee, what worries me about getting into this open streets business and advocating for closures of streets is if there's evidence that going back to the old way of doing things with vehicles on the streets, that the businesses are just gonna throw their hands up and say, you know what, it did work the old way. Let's go back to doing it the old way, and rather than the Bike Ped Committee driving things down our throats. And so I think it's important, at least to me, that part of it is important if we can make the business benefit the businesses. But the other part of it is the bike ped access part. If that's not being provided, I mean, that should be our goal. But providing bike ped access, our job is not to save businesses. So I think that's an important reason to do this for me. And so that being said, I agree. I love parklets. I think they're great. If we're designing them to be permanent features, then let's build them as permanent features and make sure they're safe enough. And then and then street closures to me seem like something that should be developed as a temporary solution or idea. And that if there is outcry from the community that it's not working, that at least we can pull that out of there. Those are just a couple thoughts that I have, but I totally agree with the idea of developing a process and a methodology. And so, you know, what I'm going to share is really not that, but what it is, and I'm going to share my screen here, Keith provided me a base map, actually, if I can, yeah. So what I did was I don't know if y'all can see my screen.
We can.
Okay, so of course it's not letting me.
At least I can anyway.
Okay, so I basically just took the peninsula and overlaid city maintained streets onto a what is essentially a zoning map. So these red, pink blobs are all type of commercial zoning, with the exception of light and heavy industrial. And then they've got 125 or 150 foot buffer around them because I wanted to be able to have them overlap at the street. I haven't run any kind of complicated analysis on this, although I had great aspirations to. But what it does offer some insight on, and Keith, I'm sure you and the planning staff have developed similar maps, but it helps you identify pretty easily where the city-owned streets are in relation to commercial areas. And so, you know, in the spirit of having a defined,
not a lot of them.
There may be a way to actually have a geospatial approach to this as a precursor to the social side, which would be coming from the businesses and from the community. And when I say geospatial, what I mean is with each of these streets, you could insert, for example, a width of pavement, right? And that would allow you to run some kind of preliminary analysis or desktop analysis to say, that street's 60 feet wide. It can accommodate X, Y, and Z vehicles, bikes, pedestrians, businesses, tents, whatever. And I guess all this is going toward is just having a multi-step process that is reviewed prior to saying we're going to commit to changing the streetscape. So that's all I have to offer. I could never be the person to suggest to a business something that they may feel like could threaten them, without us having some documentation to suggest otherwise. So I think we just have to be really careful as we move through this.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. So, I was just going to look at that map and see north of it, but that's okay. No, that's good. We're fine. All right, great. Thank you. A couple of things, if I might, just really quickly. Since we last met and today, we did report out our committee meeting to both the Traffic and Transportation Committee and the City Council as a whole. And I have two observations about that report. One is there was a keen amount of interest at City Council as to what we're doing. So we can thank Councilmember Brady for putting that on our shoulders, but there was a lot of interest. And interestingly, I think this committee had a little bit more urgency than council did. It was their recollection, as was mine, that they were sort of waiting for us until about July to come back with some recommendations. And I think the comments, and I think it's fair to say, Councilmember Brady, jump in if you think I'm wrong, they would rather us get it right than get it quickly. And I think in this day and age, that's pretty good advice from the body that's ultimately going to pass on whatever we recommend. So I'm interested to see what we come up with tonight. We will take whatever it is back to council through the Traffic and Transportation Committee, recognizing that they're anxious to hear what we have to say, but against the backdrop that they're pragmatists right now. And I think probably anything too radical, particularly if it's opposed by business, will be met with some resistance. And I would love to see us come out of the gates on this with a win rather than a tie or a loss. So that being the case, Keith, I think what I would love to hear from the committee is sort of some recommendations based on what we've heard from the group and what Steve has typed up. Is there something that we can come away with tonight that we can bring back to City Council through the Committee of Traffic and Transportation as a recommendation that we all can get behind and think that will pass muster, both with those 12 or 13 that have to vote and with the community? And I think there are. I've heard a lot, and I think Gervais sort of hit the nail on the head. South Market, or the market anyway, seems like a pretty good place to start. I'd like to add one from my perspective too. And I'm not sure, Keith, if you and I talked about this, but it's something I've talked about a lot. I think one of the things that we can do when we talk about open streets and with the charge that we've gotten is we can have some bike ped connectivity, and there's a really easy place to do that. And if those of you, if Matt, you had your map, it'd be easy to show you, but between King and Market Street on Wentworth, the road is one way to the west. And I don't need to give you all the history of why that is, but I would if you ask. But it is, and it will probably forever be one way because of Anson Borough and the agreement they made with the city. But it doesn't mean that it always has to be two lanes one way. And if you look east-west across the peninsula, it is very hard to circumnavigate or direct navigate the peninsula east-west and west-east without having to zigzag or break the law. And I really think a two-way cycle track on the southernmost lane on Wentworth Street between Meeting and King would be a great start to that connectivity. And I think that goes back to sort of what Matt's been talking about. We are a bike ped committee. That would be a piece of bike ped infrastructure that I don't think would step on business toes, is available to us very easily and really at limited resistance out there. So I'd like to put that out there for discussion, and whether we get through that one tonight or not. I don't believe that stretch of Wentworth Street, by the way, is something that has been dedicated back to the city. Am I right about that, Keith?
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, the entirety of Wentworth is owned by the state. Yes, sir.
So that adds a little bit of a complicating factor. But anyway, with that, let's go to work and let's see if we can come up with something in the next 20 minutes or so to take out of this committee. And
if I could just add just a little bit of sprinkles based off of what folk had said. Really like the emphasis on articulating open streets through the lens of equity. I think that's an amazing point. The feedback and evaluation process is one that we've done a little bit with the curbside, and Meg has been exceptional at that. Our GIS team helped us with that as well. They mapped out all the locations, set up a email address, a web page that described exactly what the program was for and all that. And so there's definitely best practices we could take from that immediate move we made earlier in the year. The thing with the parklets piece that is going to be a lift is the design criteria. When you look at the best practices of other cities, especially when you take into consideration the type of materials, the interaction with vehicular traffic, the design criteria has been a big part, as well as most of the cities that we've looked at, and Alan's looked at this even deeper than I, community buy-in has been a big part of the allowance of parklets. So for example, a city like San Francisco, which is multiple times our size, only has about 30, 35 different parklets in its entire city, right? And strategically placed and otherwise into some of its other larger urban planning modes. So just taking that into consideration, that I don't want to skip over the SEDOT permitting part too, right? So as we entertain, whether it's parklets or usage of public right-of-way that we don't own, that requires that SEDOT permitting portion. So the grant piece, I think I wanted to make sure I sent that out to you because I wanted to let you know conversations I'm having at the national level about these issues. But the conversation that Councilmember, the chair brought up about time too, is this something that you all want to see happen right away, answer the call of what you're hearing from on the street, or is this something to take the time with, figure out as necessary, and then roll out? If that's the case, the grant might be an amazing opportunity, understanding that that's something that wouldn't be available for a couple of months anyway. So those are the particular highlight sprinkles I just wanted to throw on that I heard from the conversation.
Sorry, I muted myself. With that, the floor is open, and who wants to jump in? Go ahead, David.
Well, I think we can probably, I think we would like to move ahead reasonably quickly, but I think we could have a two-pronged approach in terms of, I mean, ideally get something to start and then move other things further down. I mean, so that absolutely, I think we should do the grant and we got to figure out what we want to do. And that can be sort of a midterm project, but it seems like there are some potentials, especially as we talked about closing markets, and I Magnolia actually sounded interesting, that potentially could be done more quickly, and there is support for.
Agreed. Anybody else?
I was curious, Katie, Najima, others on that group, were there any dissenters on South Market Street to that concept, or was everybody in favor that you could tell?
I will be really honest. I threw in Market Street. That was something that I thought would maybe be a safer alternative than continuing to look at King, knowing how much heartburn the discussion around King was causing for business owners. So I honestly, I think the only business owner I know of on Market is in support is Bo. I haven't reached out to others yet. And I don't know if others did in between our conversations or not.
So a question for Meg would be, is there a way to relatively quickly survey those business owners in a particular area, perhaps even going beyond the capabilities that Charleston Moves has had, to do that? Meg, what do you think?
Sure. One real quick clarifying thing, though. I think what Keith was saying is that he actually received a request from the Market Street vendors talking about South Market. So that would mean that we already have that buy-in. Is that okay?
Is that a complete group, or is that just individuals?
So can I jump in on that one, Meg? Let me jump on that one really quick. So I think the Market Street vendor request actually came from the market vendors and not necessarily the brick and mortar vendors that are on either the south or the north side of the street.
Yes,
let me just make this observation. As configured, the vending spaces in the market on the south side in particular are built to have trade out the south side into that area in the street, and it is meant for trade and for commerce. And I do think that if we went and surveyed the businesses along the south side, I think that we'd probably get buy-in, because there's very little parking there. No one goes and parks there is looking to go into those businesses. But I do think Meg would have to go to work and talk to them, because I don't think that we've got buy-in from the brick and mortar vendors. I do think we have buy-in from the market vendors. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Am I right about that, Keith?
Yes, sir, you're absolutely right. The message that we received was a draft reopening plan that was from those interior vendors and not the brick and mortar. I'm reading the document now. Specifically, street closure would be used to create access the market's exterior counters by customers. No tents or vendors would be set up in the street. With the South Market Street pedestrian lane, a total of 87 vendors could operate in the 4-block market. Without South Market Street, 57 vendors could operate. This plan could also include a plan to keep the vendors at least 6 feet from each other.
Right. And those trading bays do open up out there. A very quick piece of history, and then currently, this has been something that's been talked about for a good long time in the city. The most recent conversation that had legs on it was as we were designing the third phase of the Market Street drainage project, which, as you may or may not know, is the deep tunnel drainage project that has gone through the 2 phases. It's still not completed at phase 3, and which includes, among other things, the streetscape. They're going to have to do some other things with underground wiring. So it's a perfect time to do it. And it's easy to put bollards in. It's easy to make this very flexible. It's very attractive to me, both as a citizen, as a council member, as a member of this committee. But I do think we would have to bring this to, among other people, Meg, John Keener and his team, who's right there at the corner of I guess he's at State and South Market. I don't think this would work on the north side, Katie. And I think you've already got some natural flow through up there because we have the permanent bollards just north of the market on the north side. And we've got some hotels up there. It'd be really tough for access if we started shutting down the street. So if that's one of the things that this committee is interested in and we vote on doing something about it tonight, I think it should come with a caveat that we have Meg, if she's got time, or somebody go and run this by the vendors, because we've got to be partners with businesses as we do these types of things.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, yes, who's speaking?
this is Najima.
Oh, thank you. I see you. Yes, yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
Please.
Yes. At this point, I think if it is appropriate, if we use Robert's rules of order, that we make a motion that we move forward with this South Market Street, exploratory project, and make that a recommendation that goes forward.
Okay, we've got a motion to move forward with, I think that would be a pilot program, correct? On South Market. And would you add into that motion that we survey business owners?
Oh, definitely. The motion should state, I move that we move forward with a pilot or exploratory project around South Market Street using the input that we have received and the feedback that we've received from the vendors, in line with any other public comment, and to humbly request the assistance of Meg Thompson, her office, and any other resources. I'm certain there are lots of other perhaps organizations that might be able to assist us, perhaps with pulling some of these ideas and data together.
All right, so we've got a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we've got a second. Any discussion or further discussion on this matter? I think
Chair.
Point of order from Mr. Benjamin, who's not a voting member of this committee.
I'm not a voting member at all.
I'm going to recognize you though.
I was just asking whether or not, and the committee can say no to this, whether or not the motion can be amended to what the specific cross streets were asked of the vendors. I believe they asked for Church to State Street. I believe that's what the ask was. South Market.
The chair would entertain an amendment to the motion. Does the moving party accept that amendment?
Yes.
All right. And who seconded? Katie, you okay with that?
Yes, I accept.
All right.
Yep.
So as amended, we have a motion.
The state, is that what you're saying?
I think it's going to be between what streets again, Keith?
Church Street, sir, and State Street.
Okay. Between Church and State, which is a very small portion of the market right now, but I think it's the most practical. Meg, do you have any sense of how many brick and mortar businesses there are in that block? It's okay if you don't. I'm thinking about.
Look, no, I don't know off the top of my head.
I'm thinking there's about 8 to 10 would be my guess.
It's not many. It would be
Right.
very easy for us to call, try to talk to the owner or manager, get their feel on it, something like that.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion on this motion?
Yeah, I got something real quick.
Yes, sir. Live from South Market Street.
That's right. Yeah, if y'all would like me to, I mean, I'll volunteer to literally just go one by one and talk to the owners. I know most of them anyway. I can just go down with the clipboard, write everyone's down, and ask them what everyone feels. That makes it easier.
If you would do us a favor and coordinate that with Meg, just so we have a central clearinghouse and a person on staff who's keeping an eye on all that, that would be very helpful. I mean, clearly, if you see some of your fellow business owners, but just to the extent that you're official representative of this committee, I would ask that you move through Meg, if that's okay with you.
And
Great.
just Chairman, just to let you know, what I feel like will happen is once Bo does that initial survey, they're going to want a meeting to talk
Right.
with you and about what this would look like. So just a heads up, that would probably be coming.
And I'm happy to be part of any meetings that go forward, and we'll invite any member of this committee to do so as well.
And Meg, Matt Froelich or somebody from BFRC probably should be involved. They've been the main folk who've been interacting with those market vendors. So just don't want to step on his toes.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. All right. Any further discussion?
I had a question.
Yes.
Not around this issue actually, but one that impacts our recommendation and decision-making ability. If I am correct, this particular committee does not have the ability to meet together without the approval of council. Am I correct?
We have to publicly notice any meeting that we have.
Any full meeting, we have to publicly notice.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can call our own meeting. Council doesn't have to pre-approve our meeting, but
Okay.
we have to make sure that we follow public notice.
Okay, I'm just trying to think about how we're going to continue to, you know, share this information and work.
Well, we're going to do that. We're going to meet more often. We're going to work. But in the meantime, everyone is free clearly to speak amongst yourselves and to bring any recommendations through Mr. Benjamin, through Ms. Thompson, through the chair, and then we will, as necessary, convene a meeting to discuss.
We do have 3 subcommittees.
Right.
And we can utilize those as well, which aren't legally required to have public notice for them. But we do have those, the Finance Committee, the Design and the Education subcommittees that were formed about a year ago as well.
Right, I forgot about that.
Fashion.
Very good point.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure, Matt.
So we a lot of us talked about a process and a methodology for going about this. Is that something that we as a committee or within a subcommittee, is that something we feel like we should draft, or should we put that on city staff to draft something that would be reviewed by this committee and then the T&T committee, or no?
I'm not exactly sure I know what you're asking, but if you're talking about, you know, making this motion into something formal in writing, we can do that through staff and bring it back to the committee.
So I guess that answers my question. We just want to put forward a street to be considered for open streets. But my question is, what happens once we do that? Is it just as simple as surveying the business owners,
and
or
then
is
it'll
there an
come
actual methodology, an analysis that goes on before that decision is made?
Well, if this motion passes, we will then get Ms. Thompson to go and survey the business owners, report back to us, and she can do that without us convening. If it looks like it's going to go, we'll take it to the Traffic and Transportation Committee, and that's where the first action step will be. If there looks like there's some bumps along the road, we'll either through a subcommittee or as a group come back together again and talk about it.
And if approved by the committee, then it would then be evaluated from a design standpoint.
Right. And it'll go then through T&T and through full council, and Mr. Benjamin sits in on all the T&T meetings. Mr. Brady, Councilmember Brady does as well. So we'll be well represented to push whatever we're doing through and answer any questions that might be raised, which there will be some. Yes, Ms. Zimmerman.
Along the lines of process and methodology, I do think we should get some pre and post data collection on this so that we can measure whether this is successful or not. So I think that would, looking at Market Street, it would be an evaluation of from the businesses, if they like this idea, whether they feel, how they feel it was successful. But I do think it also might be cool to get some bike ped counts in advance over there and maybe during, and see if we can't kind of help evaluate, and maybe what's done on Market will then be more appealing on other streets throughout the city in the future.
So I don't disagree with you. I do think success can be measured in metrics, and that goes back to some conversations we had earlier in this, but also in sort of reactions from the businesses. So I don't want it to be 100% metric driven, but I do think it would be great if we can get some. I mean, there's going to be a lot of foot traffic down there. The question is where that foot traffic goes, and we're going to move it from sort of a tight squeeze space into a much more open space. But again, we'll talk to Mr. Benjamin about best practices for doing some counts and see how that works. I know one thing, what it's going to do, the traffic count's going to go way down.
Well, yeah.
Lighthearted moment there. Any other discussion on this motion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Congratulations, we've made a step forward. All right, so it's 6:04. Is there anything else y'all think we can do tonight?
How about
Yes, sir. Sorry. So I saw Mr. Saltzman's hand up, then I heard someone else speaking. So let's start with Steve and then we'll go around from there. And I apologize if I stepped on somebody.
And Mr. Chairman, if we think it's low-hanging fruit and it's a benefit, I think the Wentworth between Meeting and King proposal is worth making a motion on, barring anybody having any great objection. If it's okay, I'd like to offer a proposal that we close one of the lanes on Wentworth between Meeting and King and turn into a bi-directional bike highway on Wentworth.
Well, first, thank you. Second, I would ask if you just take an amendment to that. We need to make sure we do it through Mr. Benjamin's office because we got to involve the DOT.
Thank you.
Okay. So moved by Mr. Saltzman to go make a recommendation from this committee that we explore the two-way south lane conversion for bike access mostly between King and Meeting on Wentworth Street. Have a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Lewin, Dr. Lewin has seconded it. Discussion? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you for that. I actually think that that might get a lot of good discussion going. It's going to be interesting. That one will be interesting. All right. So we've got two motions that have passed from this committee that we're going to take forward. So Mr. Benjamin, Councilmember Brady, and members of the committee, let me just summarize by saying this. I think as a result of the first motion on South Market, the onus is now on Ms. Thompson to talk to our businesses. On the second motion, the onus will be back on, I think, Mr. Benjamin to give us some advice about where we are with DOT before we can actually institute it. But I do think we'll bring both of these forward to T&T to report it out, and we'll see what that looks like by the time we get there. I think the committee's going to want to know what we're doing, as is council. So we're off to a good start, and we'll see where this takes us. Questions?
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
would it
yes,
be
ma'am.
appropriate at some point or right now to go back to kind of what we talked about earlier, which is that we want to make it known that this is that these are pilots. This is kind of just the beginning, and that we don't want to overemphasize the peninsula, that particular area. There are opportunities elsewhere within the city of Charleston that may represent a different segment and cross-section of the population. So I'm particularly, interested in what we can do on the Upper Peninsula and this corridor that many use for transportation and access to work, and that, that this is a conversation that will continue, and that we, and whether should we come back to some of those guidelines of here's how the committee will be considering additional ideas with regards to safety, equity, and accessibility.
I think all those are great and valid points. And I think on our next agenda, we probably ought to put on there that we will consider some options off the Central Peninsula, perhaps the Northern Peninsula, and out into West Ashley, Magnolia, which Councilmember Brady was talking about. I do, as I'm sort of thinking here out loud, I do think we probably need to let the West Ashley Revitalization Commission know we're going to start touching and messing with Magnolia, because there is a whole very large report, which includes a transportation segment in it from the West Ashley Revitalization Commission, which, by the way, Mr. Benjamin, we probably ought to get at least the transportation section of that to the members of this committee, because I do believe what we're doing is consistent with some of the things that were done by Dover Cole. But I think at our next meeting, we want, if we're going to make more recommendations, we need to expand it. I do think that we should sort of put a pause at these two recommendations. I don't want to overload this out of one meeting.
Excuse me.
Sure.
I'm sorry. I want to reemphasize what Mariana is saying, because I think there needs to be a statement going forward specifically from this committee that these are two pilot projects and we would like to have a process for exploring more things in the city. And I don't think that's something that needs to be ignored. Otherwise, what are the expectations? What are we really here for? I think it's a good thing to put forth these two recommendations and a simple, maybe 4-paragraph, no more than 2-page statement of our objectives and what we hope to accomplish. I think that's reasonable. And
Sure.
if it doesn't need to be created immediately, we can put a date on it. But
And I was gonna say, I can say, you know, for certain when we give the report on traffic and transportation, when we report it out, like we will definitely include that as part of the report that we will give to the full council. So, you know, we can let it be known while we're doing it that, you know, that these are the pilots, but we're going to continue to discuss and consider and deliberate on things going forward.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the old, you know, Shakespeare, you know, it's not the beginning of the end. It's not even the end of the beginning. It's just the beginning of the beginning, right? I mean, this is the first step. And I mean, I didn't want you to take my comments and we should sort of pause tonight as being anything other than we've got two, there's more to come, and we'll let people know that we're not going to stop our work.
Is there any,
That'll suffice.
Sorry. Yes, ma'am.
is there any, does it require a motion to be talking about the parklet permitting process?
We can talk about anything we want. If there's a particular motion for action, it would take a motion, but we can certainly talk about it.
I mean, I don't want to overload everybody, but that maybe that's something if, you know, I could help with the verbiage or I don't know.
Well, Jeffrey, I think we came in with a lot of support for Parklet, and then we focused on two particular low-hanging fruits. So, but there was a lot of support for this. I think, do we have enough time to, I don't know. I don't think it should be just, it sounds like you want to make a motion.
Yeah, well, I think it would be great to put something in writing that we could show the business and say, this is what it looks like, this is what it will take. And then that could help us gauge how much they want it. So maybe the motion is to collaborate with the city to create this document where we could shop it around, and then we could gauge their interest and find out like how fast we can move this. Yes.
Well, this may be a perfect segue to let Alan unmute himself and weigh in. Alan?
Yeah, sure. As many of you, thank you for the time. As many of you know, the city does not have an actual parklet program. A lot of cities have very established guidelines. Been doing this for a very long time. We have a lot to consider. Permitting, who pays for them, how you administer the program, whose department they go through. Various safety precautions, ownership of streets. So there's a lot of exploration that would have to be done. We barely scratched the surface in the design division when we just put together a very few simple mock-ups. But the fact is, relative to my comment last time, there is space in the street, and there is some advantages to serve businesses, but also to increase the size of sidewalks and the available public realm for pedestrians. So we've got a small meeting that we're doing, kind of a design-based meeting that we're doing next week. It's an internal thing. So we're kind of already planning on, dusting this off and seeing what's possible. But, I think we do have some capacity for this. So we'd really like to have some support from other departments, which we would get, but it's certainly something to be looking at.
There's also, Alan, you've already done work as well in Avondale related to what's going on with the Savannah Highway corridor analysis that the county is doing. And then you did a parking analysis, and I think included in that were also intersection analyses to make it safer and more productive for everybody using that space. So
we went further than that.
Yes.
TNT actually approved a letter of intent that's being reviewed by the landowners there to support what the county is doing for the US 17 corridor improvement aspect based off of the work that Alan started and the county took into consideration with their design criteria. So, but that speaks more to the broader transportation enhancements for that corridor. Not as much on the parklet side, but yes, I mean it's more than on paper. It's obviously got to go to county council, but it's a reality in that regard.
But I definitely think there's a way to utilize perhaps the design subcommittee of this committee to to start really thinking about parklet guidance, working with what staff has already been doing for years, and start to develop that into how do we all kind of move this forward in a process that makes sense and that benefits everybody, especially under COVID.
I think that's a good idea, actually. Gervais, does that suit your eye on this, or do you want something different?
No, that suits me. Thank you.
So we can get that to subcommittee pretty quickly. Who do we, Keith, who's on that subcommittee?
I don't have it off the top, but
right.
I did send when at the top of this year. I know 2020 has had every possible catastrophe that could possibly happen.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
Look, man, Kobe Bryant is gone, brother. Just
that seems like 10 years ago.
But no, I did send an email because I sat with all the new committee members, specifically asked about their interest in terms of different subcommittees. I had sent out correspondence to the existing subcommittees and the new committee members who had joined them. Definitely welcome being able to schedule that meeting. I will jump out there and say I think the parklet conversation and design criteria probably should be a separate effort outside of this immediacy of the open streets piece. Alan just kind of scratched the surface about what it takes with that regard, and not even for the cities that we've been looking at, the vast majority of them, they own their streets. So we're not even taking consideration, what's going to be acceptable by the state DOT as well.
And not to overload Alan, but if we do have that subcommittee get together, Alan, if you've got time, I think you'd be a very important part of that conversation. I think
happy to do so. I actually have a question relative to this topic. I heard that there were some issues at council relative to having temporary parklets, but I'm not sure what specifically was said on that. Does anyone have any information about the general appetite for temporary parklets in the time being, while or in conjunction with a more permanent parklet program? Is there any information on that?
I'll let Councilmember Brady weigh in, and then I'll weigh in if he's got something to say about it.
No, you can go ahead.
Well, my sense is, we've had so many conversations. As you know, we've met at least 3 times a week for the last almost 9 weeks, or more than that, however many weeks it's been. And there's been a lot of conversations about it. I think that conversation has been a little bit all over the lot. I don't think there's been clear direction given from council. I do think there's been some question about what that looks like from a temporary / permanent standpoint. And that's why it's probably a good idea to get you involved and sort of look at this both in terms of a pilot program, a temporary process or resolution, and then more permanent. I just think the council has really been all over the lot on that. All right, anything else on that particular topic? I think absent a motion, we're going to put this back to a subcommittee with Alan and start talking about the parklet as a pilot program. Is that, and Gervais, you started this conversation. I want to make sure you're satisfied as a member of this committee that we've taken this in the direction that you anticipated.
Yeah, great. Should we put like a deadline on the conversation to where we can move it forward, like in a week, or how long would it take for them to?
Well, let's get Mr. Benjamin to survey the members of the subcommittee plus Alan and get something scheduled. Okay. There's a lot of stress internally right now at the city with our staff. I can't emphasize that enough. It's brutal internally right now. So I'd like to not put a deadline on that. I would just like to say, we want this to move, and I think everyone understands that.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thanks.
Chair, I do have a process question.
Sir.
This because this came up sort of, and I want to. It appears as if you all have voted both for moving forward with review of South Market Street and then also Wentworth Bikeway improvements as the two initial pieces with regards to open streets. There was this comment about some statement of sort from this committee to TNT. So I guess I'll maybe lean into Co-Chair Matt or whoever else in that regard, because as we look into this and then report out to TNT, it probably behooves having a representative of the Bike Ped Committee at Traffic and Transportation to iterate those two requests. And also, you know, as staff, we'll back y'all up with what we've found and what's feasible and what's not as well. So just want to iterate that in terms of a process standpoint.
We're always happy to have Matt or any member of the Bike Ped Committee at our TNT committee. I will remind you that, you know, Councilmember Brady and I are both members of this committee and of the TNT committee. So you've already got 2 of the 3 votes you need over there. Anyway, I think it's great that we have, and members of the committee are welcome to come. We don't take public comment at our committee meetings. We do at City Council. So let's just see how that agenda looks, and Matt will let you know. Okay.
Good.
I'm happy to, and I should have done this, share that draft document that we were throwing around, some of us were throwing around, so that everybody can see what we tried to do with some of that language to sort of lay out the beginnings of a process and prioritization.
And I think Steve did a little bit of that in his chat room.
Mm-hmm.
So
similarly, I'll share the map, but I'm going to label it draft because I know it's not complete. And I don't know how helpful it would even be, but just to share it.
I like it. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
It's very helpful for me. In fact, I'd like to perhaps put this idea out that we have someone that kind of always has a map handy. Yeah, I am coming at this from a completely different angle than most of you, and I do not look at a lot of maps, and I need to see them. So that would be.
I always have a map handy. Trust me.
I can send the committee what I sent Matt, which, you know, is a mapping of all 5 areas of the city that show private roads versus state roads versus city roads. It's a little bit disheartening,
yeah,
but it's the truth. So,
you know, Keith, maybe it'd be easier because I didn't have the GIS data. I kind of had to redraw everything, but it'd be easy to add a commercial layer onto those maps you sent me. And that may help everybody understand where the commercial districts are in West Asheville, James Island, downtown, so forth, to be able to focus on city-owned streets in those areas as low-hanging fruit.
I will not make promises based off what GIS is and isn't able to do with what they have loaded with, but I will do my best.
So that does become a little problematic because when you talk about commercial district in the city, you know, we have about 187 different zoning classifications in the city. And then we have overlay zones on top of that, and we have exceptions to overlay zones. So I think we have a pretty good sense. I mean, you go along the corridors of the major thoroughfares, those are our commercial zones out off the peninsula. So let's see what we can compile, Matt. But that one could be a real checkerboard if we try to get too much on it.
At the very least, Keith sharing what he sent me would be really helpful. It's just a map of street ownership, and it's very telling.
The street ownership, when you see it citywide, will be shocking to you all. I mean, we own very, very, very few streets. And we take them back basically as we need projects. Like we had to take back Murray Boulevard so we could do the low battery seawall. We had to take back a very small portion of Rutledge Avenue at Bennett Street so we could put up a stop sign. So, I mean, that's kind of how we've been operating.
After somebody lost their life.
Well, a few people. And for 11 years, I asked for it. It took 11 years, but we got a stop sign. So anyway, small victory. Before we adjourn, I just want to let everybody know, you see it behind me, I've got Low Country Rapid Transit as my background. There's a lot going on with Low Country Rapid Transit. I want to put on our next agenda, Mr. Benjamin, a report on Low Country Rapid Transit, because there has now been a recommendation put forward about the last 2 miles of it, which comes right through the middle of downtown Charleston, down both Meeting Street and Calhoun, and is thinking about transit and transportation. And one of the things this committee is going to need to weigh in on is what that's going to look like and whether it's going to be truly multimodal. I saw another proposal today that talks about reversing lanes. And so lots of things to hear about. And I want you all to be way up on that, because it's going to be a big part of what the future of mobility looks like in downtown Charleston.
Mr. Chair, am I okay with assuming that because this group has until July to figure out the open streets thing, that we're still in that realm of being able to meet monthly, even though that's not what our ordinance says, or does there have to be?
Yes, totally. We're under the emergency ordinance and Councilmember Brady's standing order for this committee to move it. We are now an arm of the Traffic and Transportation Committee in the City Council, and we won't make you all meet as often as we do, but I think probably right now we should be on a 2 or 3 week cycle.
I've motioned for a 2-week to move things faster.
We can do that by acclamation, by the way, because I think, again, does anybody object to us meeting? I think our next meeting should follow our next Traffic and Transportation Committee meeting, which is when? It's going to be 2 weeks and a couple days.
Yeah, it won't, that means we wouldn't be meeting until towards the tail end. Well,
no, because we can have a TNT meeting before the next City Council meeting, right?
Yes, sir. But our next City Council meeting would be towards the tail end of June. So
right.
I think June 22nd
or
so 23rd.
23rd. Yes, sir. So it'll be after that.
So you're looking somewhere between 2.5 and 3 weeks.
That sounds like it would work well, because didn't you say that the Traffic and Transportation Committee was asking for recommendation for July, to be ready for them in July?
That's correct.
Yes, ma'am.
So we can kind of finalize our formal recommendation at that next meeting.
And we have the use of the subcommittees as well to move things forward.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, subcommittees can be scheduled at any time.
Right. So we'll definitely make sure that that happens, and that'll certainly happen within 2 weeks. Okay, the hour is now 6:25. We're 1 hour and 25 minutes in. Thank you all for your hard work. Unless there's anything else for the common good and for the good of the city and for this committee, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn. And before we have that motion, we will make sure we keep everybody in the loop. We'll get the subcommittees in place. For the staff, thank you for your hard work and joining in with this committee. And again, I cannot emphasize to those of you who serve on this committee, how hard our staff is currently working. It is really rough. So thank you all very much for what you're doing. And thank every member of this committee for what you're doing too. It's important, and the eyes are on us. So let's see what we can do to push this all forward.
Move to adjourn.
Got a motion to adjourn? Do I have a second?
I second.
All right, y'all be safe out there. Thank you for your service to our city, and we will see you all anon. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.